Good evening. This is Tara Miller Lapham, and I am going to go over my Spring 2025 data project for my instructional data class at Georgia Southern University. Um, I decided to create a data team to look at possible growth or lack of growth in our ELA and math scores from last year's GMAS to possibly this year's GMAS with our 7th grade students. And I went through the steps that were outlined in FISC's Leading Data Informed Change Schools, beginning with establishing a data team and moving through each of the steps. And we're going to talk about those as we go through this presentation. What did we look for? We looked at the GMAS scores for 2024 as compared to the predictive MAP winter scores of 2025 and Beacon winter scores of 2025 for ELA and math. We also looked at attendance trends and behavior trends in trying to understand the data and how it was going to play a factor in our gains or losses for our 7th graders, according to Bernhardt's data analysis for continuous school improvement. We wanted to see the difference between the previous year versus this year, what's working, what's not working, maybe take a deep dive into the data to find out what we need to do in the future. We had 5 homerooms within our 7th grade hallway. And in those 5 homerooms, the makeup consists of 3 general ed homerooms and 2 inclusion homerooms that include a subgroup of special ed students within those 2 homerooms. We looked first at the achievement level data before we looked at our losses and gains, just to see how many kids were within that beginning level, beginning achievement level versus developing achievement level versus proficient achievement level, and to see if we were making gains in those achievement levels and where the majority of our 7th grade students were falling as compared to last year to this year. So we started collecting that data. The data team started working on it. And what we found in each of the homerooms, and I'm going to go through those very quickly, is that we still have a large majority of our 7th grade students that are in the beginning level for GMAS last year and MAP and Beacon this year, with some increases in the number of students that are in those beginning levels. So for ELA, for our first teacher, there was an increase in the number of students in that beginning achievement level. And in math, GMAS versus Beacon, there was no change in the number of students in that beginning level. So we're not really growing and are developing in our proficient levels where we need to be with our students. Same thing with the second teacher, although there was slight improvement in the number of students in that beginning level versus developing and proficient in the math, there was really not a whole lot of change in that beginning level with the ELA. Our third homeroom showed increases in that student population in the beginning level achievements for ELA and no change in the math. Homeroom number 3, again, more students falling into that beginning category for ELA and less in the developing and the proficient achievement levels, where there was slight improvement in the math as far as a drop in how many students were in that beginning level versus developing, which did not change, and then the proficient level, which increased slightly in the math. And our last teacher, an inclusion teacher as well, more gains in that beginning level and less gains in our developing and our proficiency levels for both ELA and math. Even though we did make some slight gains to developing achievement levels in the math, there were none or no students that fell in that proficiency category. Looking at gains and losses for each of the teachers, as you can see, teacher number 1 had a negative 2% growth in ELA and a negative 6% growth in math. Teacher number 2 had a 2% increase in ELA, but a negative 2% growth in math. Teacher number 3 had a negative 2% growth in ELA and no growth in math. Teacher number 4 had a negative growth in ELA of 3% and a negative 7% growth in math. And teacher number 5 had a negative 4% growth in ELA and a negative 1% growth in math. Looking at the overall data analysis of the 72 students that did fall within that category, beginner achievement level, they did have a loss of scores within that group. There was not an improvement in that group, and that's something that we're going to have to work on. There was a slight growth in scores with our developing students in the developing achievement level 2. And then there was, again, a loss of scores on the negative side for our level 3 proficient students. And that was in ELA. For math, of our 50 students within that beginning level of achievement, there was a loss of percentages within those scores. So we did decrease there, and that's another area we're going to have to start looking at increases in. Achievement level 2, which is the developing, we did have a slight growth for that in those 55 students, and then another slight growth for the proficient students, but not enough to give us the gains that we needed to see. So overall, our percentage of growth or loss in 7th grade, when we put all of our information together, it looks like we may lose up to 2% or around 2% in ELA from last year, and we may lose around 3% for our math on the GMAS for these upcoming GMAS tests for these 7th graders. Definitely going to have to start looking at implementing some small group, maybe one-on-one interventions, maybe using the MAP and Beacon growth data to reform how we're doing our MTSS supports, integrate reading and writing across all subject areas, making sure that the teachers are consistent with their teaching, and, work more on our assessments and writing, maybe even some journaling to help students be more proficient in ELA. Other factors that we decided to look at was discipline issues, because we had a lot of 7th graders that missed instructional time within the classroom because our 7th graders had the highest number of incidents of behavior school-wide. They had the most ISS days overall between the 3 grade levels. And even though they were not the highest suspended out of school, combining all of their discipline together with the ISS, they missed the most instructional time of the other students in the building, which I think also contributes to our loss of percentage points. Attendance. We do have a large number of students that have excessive absences, which is 10 or more absences per class, and excessive tardies of 10 or more tardies in those classrooms. And overall, for the 7th grade, they were just shy of 20% of the students there with excessive absences, and 18.1% with excessive tardies. Again, they're missing a lot of instructional time. We decided to also look at the reading levels, and what we found was that almost 78% of our current 7th grade class is not reading on grade level. That contributes to low test scores, low interest in testing, not being able to perform at the level we need them to. And I'm hoping that next year, maybe a goal could be to increase that to maybe 40% by the time that they're out of 8th grade reading on grade level. Things that we noticed was that we did not have a whole lot of growth in our lowest students, which means that we really need to tackle those level one kids, maybe realign our teaching for those level one kids to decrease the gaps that we found there. We also need to increase difficulty for those higher performing students so that maybe we can push those scores up a little bit higher. Project-based learning, maybe um, a different curriculum to promote further growth with those higher level students. And making sure that we're, like I said earlier, integrating all of those reading strategies across all subject areas to pick up on what we're missing. And that would be next steps for instruction. Instructional gaps. We need to increase that rigor for our higher level students. We need to focus more on math and making sure that that instruction is meeting all the needs of the students. Making sure that our teachers are using their data to promote learning within the classroom and close the gaps. Other considerations, more trainings, taking a look at our school-wide literacy and numeracy goals. We do have groups that meet once a month to take a look at those numbers and kind of revise instruction to meet the needs of the students, but we need to make sure that that's what we're doing. We didn't quite get to our SIP goals, but we did take a look at increasing student achievement in ELA and math, improving reading proficiency across all content areas, addressing instructional consistency and teacher effectiveness. This group of sixth graders really had a tough, seventh graders, I'm sorry, in the sixth grade. They started the year out with their math teacher on maternity leave. And then halfway through the year, they had a change in their ELA teacher, which could contribute to the loss of instruction and retaining information. This year, the seventh grade students had a loss of a math teacher early in the year and waited 3 months for a replacement teacher. And they also lost one of their experienced ELA teachers after Christmas. It's been a lot of change for these kids, and there's just not been a whole lot of consistency. The seventh grade teachers also have the highest rate of absenteeism in the building. We also want to look at strengthening school-wide behavioral and attendance supports maybe for next year, keeping those kids in the classroom management strategies, making sure that teachers are handling everything within the classroom and expecting good behavior from those kids to keep them out of ISS and OSS, and increasing rigor and alignments. Those were just some thoughts of maybe we could look at those for our SIP goals for next year. Final thoughts. This was eye-opening. It was a lot going through. We only made it through 7 of the steps in FISC. We started step 8, which was creating an action plan for some SIP goals for next year. But we are really going to take this and into the data retreat that we have scheduled at the end of May, and possibly plug my findings into some new goals for next year within our school, but definitely need to focus on the growth level for those level 1 students and offer the rigor and support for those kids that are more advanced, offering them a little bit more enrichment activities maybe. We are using journeys and progress learning. We started that this year in literacy and numeracy days once a week. So we are going to probably continue with that next year and see if that makes any changes to the student scores. We looked at the steps in FISC and looked at Bernhardt's how do we change this in continuing our school improvement. We also used the Beacon Assessment Manual to convert our scores for that, and Northwest Evaluation Association for converting MAP scores to get our data results as far as gains and losses. It was definitely a task to convert all of those scores, but it made it worth it in the end. And thank you so much for taking the time out to listen to my data project.